So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome from wherever you are joining us today. I'm Silvia Garcia-Pereira, and I am an IMCW teacher. And it brings me great joy to be moderating this session today with dear teacher Leigh Brasington. We are happy you're here with us live today, but also knowing that many more of you will be watching the recording. And again, welcome. This is the Second Sunday Dharma Series, a fundraiser for Inside Meditation Community of Washington, D.C. And we come together on the second Sunday of every month to spend time getting to know an inspiring Dharma teacher, learning from their wisdom, their practice, and what's most important to them. But before we begin, I would like to go over some logistical details. Sophie and Nora will be providing ASL interpretation. And also you may select CC on the Zoom menu at the bottom to start closed captioning. And we would like to encourage you also, if possible, to keep your camera on, as this might foster a sense of community. And also, there'll be a time for questions during this session. And we need for you to please pose the questions in the chat, where under Ask Questions Here. So that's where you will be posting the questions on the chat. Ask questions here, and we'll try to get to as many as possible today. So now we're honored and grateful to introduce to you Leigh Brasington. Leigh began meditating in 1985 and was a senior student of Venerable Ayya Khema, who authorized him to teach. And he began teaching retreats in 1997. And since then, he has taught Janas, dependent origination, and insight practices in over 100 retreats. He is the author of Right Concentration, a practical guide to the Janas, and Dependent Origination and Emptiness, which is available to download from his website with a donation or dana. And we'll be posting the link to his website on the chat at the end. And personally, I have been blessed to have him as a teacher on several retreats, and having the opportunity to practice with him transformed my meditation practice and my growth in the Dharma. So it is with deep gratitude that we welcome Leigh here. Welcome, Leigh.
Thank you, Sylvia. It's great to be here. Nice to, well, I can't see all of you, but those of you that I can see, yeah, it's great. So, Thanissaro Bhikkhu said his teacher told him that he shouldn't try and teach the Dhamma to anyone who hadn't been meditating recently. So hopefully all of you did your morning meditation, but to get started, we're going to do a 1-minute gratitude meditation. So get yourself settled and close your eyes and just think about what you're grateful for. We all have a lot to be grateful for. Access to the Dhamma, our friends, our families. So just spend the next minute just appreciating the good things that have happened in your life. grateful for all those who have preserved the Dharma for us. And I'm very grateful to the Buddha for finding and showing the way. So, questions?
So, Leigh, to begin, as a way of, for the community of friends here to get to know you, we would appreciate if you can share what attracted you to the practice and how did you discover the Dharma?
So in 1984, I went running one day in a bad mood. This was not a good thing to do, and I messed up my knees. 11 months later, I was visiting some friends from university, and one of them handed me Shogam Trungpa's book, Shambhala, and said, "Read this book." Okay, I'll read the book. I was kind of depressed because my knees weren't working right. So while I was reading the book, one of my other friends who's a chiropractor actually fixed my knees. So suddenly life was looking a lot better. When I finished the book, my friend who had given it to me said, "Well, now you got to meditate." And I was like, "That's so boring." He said, "What did Trungpa tell you?" And so whining and trying to meditate, I had no instruction other than what was in that book. I had started seeing a massage therapist for my knees before they got fixed, and I continued to see her because she was good, and she was a student of Ruth Denison. And she said, you should do some meditation. It'd be good for you." And I said, yeah, because that's what I told everybody that told me that. And then she says a few weeks later, "Oh, there's going to be a retreat down at Ruth Denison's place in Southern California. You should go." I was unemployed. Okay. And she also said, "The teacher is giving a talk at the San Francisco Zen Center Wednesday night. Go see the talk. If you like the teacher, sign up." And it was Ayya Khema. I don't remember what she talked about, but I do remember how clear it was. So I went and signed up for the retreat, actually never having meditated before in my life. I thought I had meditated, but I quickly learned that no, what I was doing wasn't what Ayya Khema was teaching. And on that retreat, I wanted to learn about meditation. I was not interested in this religious stuff. My father was a Presbyterian preacher. He was a literalist. Noah in the Ark, Daniel in the lion's den, that all literally happened. And when I was 18, I realized, this is more Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. And so I wasn't interested in religion at all. That was just Easter Bunny and Santa Claus stuff. And I asked some question of Ayya Khema early in the retreat, and her response was, "Oh, there's nothing to believe. The Buddha said, ehipassiko, come and see for yourself." And that was the point at which I was actually interested in, whatever else was going on. I consider myself a scientist. I want to know. And so, some spiritual tradition that, indicated you should find out for yourself as opposed to believe something. That was how I got started. And it changed my life. It had a profoundly positive influence on my life.
Beautiful. So you, as you shared, you came to retreats with Ayya Khema and who taught the Janas, and you are known for being one of the few teachers who teaches Jhana retreats. So can you describe for us what are the Jhanas?
Okay. So the Jhanas are 8 altered states of consciousness brought on by concentration and yielding even more concentration. This allows you to stair-step your way to deeper and deeper levels of concentration. Now, concentration is the usual translation of samadhi. But a better translation, I think, would be indistractability, the ability to not become distracted. And so these are altered states of consciousness that enhance your ability to not become distracted. The first of these states is, well, it's on the ecstatic end of the spectrum. It depends on how intensely it appears for you, but there's a lot of physical energy as well as emotional joy, happiness. And then the second one, you calm the physical aspect down, and it's more of an emotional state. There's some background energy still. And the emotional state is joy, happiness. The third one, the physical energy is gone and you're just contented for no reason other than you're concentrated. And the fourth one, you let go of the pleasure of the contentment and you're in a state of very deep equanimity. This is a jumping off point for doing your insight practice. There are 8 other states that are deeper levels of indistractability, concentration. Mm-hmm. They go by the names of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception or non-perception. And yeah, they're even more subtle states. And if you can maintain a subtle state, this will enhance your concentration and give you that less ego-centered perspective of reality so that your insight practice works better.
Great. Thank you, Leigh. So one thing when you're talking about altered states of consciousness or of mind, that doesn't mean that when you are in those states that you're still aware of what is happening, right?
Yeah. So you're in an altered state. It has not been brought on by something that distorts your ability to perceive reality accurately. Okay? You're getting there with concentration. So in order to enter the first jhana, you're going to need to generate some degree of concentration, such as by following your breathing or doing metta meditation or doing a body scan or a mantra. Any of these can be used to generate sufficient concentration. So you're not altering your perception of reality, you're altering the scope of what you're perceiving to one-pointedness. And this takes you into an altered state of consciousness, but it's still much more accurate at perceiving reality, both internally, what's going on with your body and mind, and externally with what's going on outside of you.
Thank you. Yeah, so, but there is the perception that practicing the jhanas is reserved for the most advanced students. But however, right concentration is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. So why do you think that most teachers don't talk about the jhanas?
Well, the correct answer is, you have to ask those teachers. But yeah, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the jhanas. Okay. All right. So the Buddha and the monks and nuns at his times were all practicing the jhanas, and what they were doing is laid out in, well, let's say slight detail, not great detail, slight detail in the suttas repeatedly. And we get a sense of what these states are. In the jhanas, as described in the Buddha's discourses, the suttas, there is obvious still awareness of your body, because it says that when you arrive in one of these states, you drench, steep, saturate, and suffuse your body with the factors of that jhana. So there's obviously body awareness if you can do something like that. But as time went on, the amount of concentration required for you to call it a jhana kept increasing. We can see some of the very late suttas that were composed probably long after the Buddha's death, that the understanding of the jhanas has increased in terms of the amount of concentration required. When you get to the Abhidhamma, which we could say 200 years after the Buddha's death, the level of concentration has gone up even more. When you get to the commentaries, which started around the year 0, okay, so 400 years after the Buddha's death, then at that point, the level of concentration keeps going up until you get to the Visuddhimagga, which was written about 500 or 5th century AD. So we're talking 800 or 900 years after the Buddha. The level of concentration required there is such that it literally says in the Visuddhimagga, of those who come to meditation, only 1 in a million people can get to the first jhana. Whereas at the time of the Buddha, everybody's getting to the first jhana. Now, Theravadan Buddhism looks primarily to the commentaries for its understanding of what the Buddha taught. We could say that Theravadan Buddhism really is commentarial Buddhism, Visuddhimagga Buddhism. And so the understanding of the jhanas in mainstream Theravadan Orthodox Buddhism is what's found in the Visuddhimagga, that only 1 in a million people can do. I mean, don't take that literally, but something that's really difficult. You've got to be so supremely concentrated you're not aware of your body or sounds or the passage of time. You're gone, which is quite a contrast to what's described in the suttas. So to teach what's described in the Visuddhimagga to the average layperson coming on a 10-day retreat is impossible. I have studied with the Venerable Paok, who does teach the Visuddhimagga jhanas, and before I studied with him, someone who had studied with him prior to that told me, oh, if you want to learn his system, you need to go on retreat for probably a minimum of 6 months. And so, not practical for people who are going on retreat for 10 days. Mm-hmm. So most teachers' understanding of the jhanas is from the Visuddhimagga standpoint, not all teachers. Of those who understand it more closely aligned with what's in the suttas, which is what I'm trying to do, what Ayya Khema was doing, it's still tricky to teach the stuff. When I teach a retreat, I go in knowing that there's going to be a certain percentage of people who will not experience the jhana. Now, how can I teach a retreat such that everyone who comes on the retreat feels like they got, a valuable experience? It was worth their time, even if they didn't get to a jhana. So it's a difficult thing to try and teach it. So, and there's reluctance to teach it amongst those who understand the jhanas as they're described in the suttas. But the majority of people in Theravadan Buddhism understand the jhanas as just what's described in the Visuddhimagga, which are actually 8 separate states from what's in the suttas. Yeah. And so they can't teach that to lay people in 10 days, so they don't teach it.
Yeah. Thank you, Leigh, for that. But also, it's so important to, as you said, as what is described in the practice of the Buddha, to know the map also, because you're meditating and you might stumble into one of these states, and then you may get scared or withdraw from it because you don't know what's happening. So I think it's really, and in your book you actually describe and lay out the map. So I think it's really important. But also what you said, that the purpose of the jhanas is so that then we are ready for insight practice. So can you describe if there's a difference between the jhanas and insight practice, and also how would you go from the jhanas to insight practice?
Okay, yeah. So yes, there is a difference between the jhanas and insight practice. There are insights available in learning the jhanas and being in them, but they're small compared to the amount of insight you need to be really transformative. One of the striking things about learning the jhanas is that if you're focused on learning the jhanas, in other words, you're craving to get to one of the jhanas, that's going to prevent you from getting to the jhanas. There you go. Absolute example of the second noble truth. Craving leads to dukkha. You're craving the jhana and you get the dukkha of not getting to the jhana. So yeah, there are insights along the way. But the fact that, okay, you learned a jhana and it's impermanent is probably not the major impermanence that you need to understand in your life. So it's basically, the jhanas are a warm-up exercise for your insight practice. They're like sharpening a knife. You get your whetstone, you sharpen your knife, and now whatever you need to cut, you can cut much clearer. Well, the jhanas are sharpening your mind. Okay, so when you come out of the jhanas and begin doing an insight practice, the insight practice is going to be much more efficient. The way to transition from a jhana into insight practice is start doing the insight practice. Let's say you're in the fourth jhana. Now, this is a jhana of equanimity. You're sitting there very quiet, very still, very equanimous. And let's say your insight practice is to scan your body. Okay, so you're quiet, you're still, and now it's time, and you just start scanning your body. There's no big deal at all. You just start doing the insight practice. You don't need to banish the jhana. It will fade out into the background and disappear as you're doing your insight practice. If your insight practice is open awareness, okay, you're in the third jhana, you're focused on contentment to where that's all that's going on is your attention on your contented feeling, and you're going to do an open awareness practice. Now you just open up your awareness. You start doing the practice, but you start doing it with a much more indistractable mind, and you're doing it from a much less egocentric perspective, and therefore it's going to work much better. But the transition is very simple. Just start doing your insight practice.
Yeah. And what are some of the, how do we, for example, pose some of the questions or really focus on one of the three characteristics as part of our insight practice?
There are a number of practices that are oriented towards various of the three characteristics. Probably the most effective one for anicca, impermanence, inconstancy, is to pay attention to arising and passing. So once you're concentrated, whether it be jhanic or not, then you just open up your awareness, and it's not choiceless. You're choosing to notice whatever arises and whatever passes in your sensory field. So probably there are going to be sounds. So you've been focusing on your breath or on one of the jhanas, and now you just start listening, and you're noticing the arising and passing of sounds. A truck drives down the street, it arose, it passed away. A bird starts to sing. Yeah, okay, it's nice. Oh, now you've got an itch. That arose. You're noticing the arising of the itch. Oh, the bird stopped singing. Oh, another truck went by. Oh, the itch went away. So you're just noticing arising and passing. Mostly it'll be sounds and body sensations. There might be a smell that arises. If you've got your eyes closed, yeah, it's not going to be any visual. But when the bell rings, then you continue to notice arising and passing. Notice the arising and passing that happens when you eat. When I had a computer programming job, I would meditate, and then I would eat breakfast, and then I would go to work. And you just, I had a concentrated mind, and you can notice eating is a lot of arising and passing. That's probably the most profound anicca practice. It's slow moving. I like to give it to people on a longer retreat, because in 10 days, you're just beginning to get into it, but it's a really good one. For dukkha, well, so they talk about the 3 personality types: the greed type, the aversive type, and the deluded type. Well, we're all deluded. The greedy and the aversive are deluded in a way that it's predominantly greedy or aversive. Well, I'm a greed type. And when Ayya Khema told me to go pay attention to dukkha, she was pretty sharp. She realized it wasn't happening that well for me. I wasn't getting a lot of insight because I'm a greed type. I'm looking for pleasure, not the dissatisfactory nature of reality. But the way to do it is you just start looking for things that are dukkha, less than perfect. My favorite translation of dukkha is bummer. This encompasses more than suffering. It's a broader picture. You go out to your car and I forgot to get the whatever, and you got to go back in the house. You got to unlock and get it and lock back up and go out to your car again. That's dukkha. That was not satisfactory. That was a bummer that you forgot it. Okay, so you're just noticing all the bummers that happen all the time. What it says in the Satipatthana Sutta to work with dukkha is basically to work with the Four Noble Truths. Whenever dukkha happens in your life, call it by its name. This is dukkha, right? And then look for the craving associated with the dukkha. Because if the Buddha's right, craving is a necessary condition for the arising of dukkha. So just like the light switch being on is a necessary condition for the light to be on, you should be able to find the craving. Once you've identified the craving, then third noble truth, can you let go of the craving? Sometimes you can, sometimes no, not going to happen. All right. You just have to deal with the dukkha. And then, of course, keep practicing the Eightfold Path, because that's what's going to take you in the direction of overcoming dukkha. For anatta, there's 2 practices that I give students. One of them is an off-the-cushion practice. And that's to simply notice all the times throughout the day when you regenerate a sense of self. We don't have a sense of self all the time. If you're reading a really nice book, and you're right there in it, it's a detective story, and the detective's about to open the door where the bad guy's hiding, you're not thinking, I'm reading a book and the detective's about to open the door. No, you're completely lost in the book. And the phone rings, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's me, right? Me, the self came back. All right? Did you notice you regenerated a sense of self? Okay? We generate the sense of self over and over again throughout the day. We're doing something, we're completely absorbed in doing it, and then the self comes back. I did that so well, right? So pay attention to when you regenerate the sense of self. You won't be able to tell when it goes away, because if you see it go away, you'll see, oh, I saw it go away, and you just brought it back. The other practice is an on-the-cushion concentrated practice. And that's the who am I practice. This was Ramana Maharshi's sole practice. Just keep asking, who am I? The way Ayya Khema taught it was you ask, who am I? And whatever answer you get for the question, who am I? Turn it into a question. And whatever answer you get for that question, turn it into a question. And keep doing that until it either peters out or goes in a loop, and then come back and ask, who am I? And hopefully get a different question. The beauty of it is there's no right answer. I mean, anatta, not self. But what you're exploring is, who do I think I am? Mm-hmm. And this can be quite interesting. It can take you surprisingly far. Just asking these questions. Most of the time, it's just, who am I? I'm a man. Well, what does it mean to be a man? It means I have responsibilities. Well, it sounds like you don't like responsibilities. What's that about? Yeah, I just want to have fun. Why do you want to have fun? Well, it's fun. I mean, not a lot to learn there. But the fact it's gone in a loop now, I just want to have fun because it's fun. Back to the original question, who am I? And keep going. And sometimes you'll find some very interesting stuff bubbling up. So those are 3 practices, but there's, well, the tradition is 84,000 Dharma doors. I assume that means there's 84,000 insight practices. But just paying attention to what's actually happening in the here and now, mindfulness.
Thank you, Leigh. That was incredible answer that covered a lot. And actually, it's a good segue to go into talking about your new book, the Independent Origination and Emptiness, especially when you were talking about dukkha. So first, can you describe what is dependent origination, and what do you feel are the most common misunderstandings?
Yeah. So dependent origination basically is this arises dependent on that. If that doesn't happen, this does not arise. So it's the teaching of necessary conditions. A necessary condition for the light to be on is the light switch be turned on. Okay? If you don't want the light on, you can turn off the light switch. If you don't want the dukkha on, you can turn off the craving. So this is the basics, that conditionality. This arises dependent on that. If that doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. Okay? What the Buddha described is a series of these connections. And this is the links of dependent origination, most famously the 12 links of dependent origination. But in the suttas we find, well, in the Four Noble Truths, we have just dukkha and craving. That's just 2 links in the Second Noble Truth. We find 2 links, 3 links, 5, 10, 12, 24. The heart of the links is you have a mind and body that gets sense contacts. The sense contacts are going to generate Vedana. That's your initial categorization of the sensory input as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant. If you're not careful, from the Vedana, you'll develop the craving, which if you get whatever you're craving, turns into clinging, and that's a setup for dukkha. Okay, so it's really best to think about dependent origination not in that forward order, but dukkha arises dependent on clinging, and clinging arises dependent on craving, and craving arises dependent on Vedana, and Vedana arises dependent on sense contacts, and sense contacts are, well, that's part of having a mind and body. Mm-hmm. So looking at it this is the heart of the links of dependent origination. Looking at it in that way, you begin to get a sense of how I get into this trouble, how I get into this dukkha state. Oh, there was some craving and clinging going on. The craving and clinging happened because I got a sensory input and it was pleasant or it was unpleasant, and I'm clinging for the absence of it. And this is what's going on. This is how our lives are structured. That's the links of it. The most general sense is just seeing that everything is arising dependent on other things, that nothing stands independent. It's all arising dependent on, well, so many other things. You are the result of your genetics, your family of origin, where you went to school, who your friends were, what movies you've watched, books you've read, retreats you've been on, teachers you've learned from, the weather today, whether it's too hot, too cold, the fact that you breathe oxygen, are the fires in Canada bringing smoke in, you're in a bad mood because you're not breathing. All of this is who you are today is dependent on all this sort of stuff going on. And so we are dependently originated creatures. And it's not that everything is dependent on everything else, but everything is dependent on enough other things that it makes a vast net of interdependency. Mm-hmm. So everything is arising dependent on other things to such an extent that it's a holistic indescribable, indifferentiatable net of being. That's the universe.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leigh. So in your book, you describe also the importance of Vedana, or being mindful of Vedana, as a way of breaking that chain of dependent origination into dukkha, especially. So
right.
can you describe that? How do we work with that? How do we work with Vedana, with the feeling tone, to break that chain?
Right. So as I said, Vedana is your initial categorization of a sensory input, and it happens automatically within a tenth of a second. Within a tenth of a second, anything you see, hear, taste, smell, you're going to decide automatically whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or neither one of those, neutral. Now, between that and the onset of craving, there's a gap. And you want to get your mindfulness into that gap and watch the processing of that sensory input. It's pleasant. Oh, I like this. I want more of it. That's the craving setting in. All right. It may be as little as a second before the craving sets in. It may even take a few minutes before the craving sets in. The width of the gap varies depending on who you are and what the sensory input is. The second establishment of mindfulness, sometimes called the second foundation of mindfulness, is mindfulness of Vedana. And what the Buddha says is just pay attention to your sensory input and notice that you are categorizing everything as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. And then with your mindfulness in there, pay attention to what's going on so that your processing doesn't lead to the craving and clinging step. The best way to work with this that I found was to get very concentrated, hopefully janically concentrated, and then just start listening. And for every sound that you hear, notice whether you think it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Now, maybe the majority of the sounds are going to be neutral. Not pleasant, not unpleasant, it's just neutral. But occasionally, the bird starts singing. That's kind of pleasant, right? A truck is unpleasant. And this is happening automatically. You don't usually have to think. If you have to think, it's probably not pleasant and not unpleasant. It's the neutral. And you notice that this keeps going on and on, that every input you get, you're deciding that, all the sounds. And so the bell rings to end your meditation period. Oh, that's pleasant. Okay, you're noticing that. Now, as you get up and start walking, okay, you're still getting sensory inputs. Notice the pleasant and unpleasant there. Or when you're still sitting, notice the pleasant and unpleasant in your body. Just scan through your body, noticing, the pressure of sitting is getting a little unpleasant at the moment, but the cool breeze on my face, that's pleasant, or whatever's there. When you sit down to eat, put a bite of food in your mouth and notice the pleasant or unpleasant taste and texture. And notice how it changes as you're chewing it up and swallowing it. And then put another bite in. Don't just be shoveling the food in, but noticing the pleasant and unpleasant nature of things. It's also important to notice that there's the 5 sense Vedana, the one that arises directly from the sensory input, the sound itself. And then there's your processing of it. Okay? The sound may be neutral, but it reminds you of something either pleasant or unpleasant. And so the experience overall, let's say, is pleasant, even though you heard a neutral sound. But you identified that sound, and then that reminded you of something that was pleasant or possibly unpleasant. We mostly get caught up in our processing, because remember, the mind is the sixth sense. And so a sixth sense input is also going to generate a Vedana. And that Vedana is the one we're probably going to notice more than the Vedana of the five sense. I can give you an example. Close your eyes, and I'm going to say some phrases. And notice the Vedana of the sound of my voice and the Vedana of the picture your mind generates. Okay, here we go. Tall trees, green grass, big bushes, President bushes. Okay, so the word bushes was the same. The Vedana was probably pretty neutral, but I'm guessing your downstream processing of big bushes and President bushes maybe was different Vedana. Okay, all right, so we mostly are aware of our downstream processing. I saw an article in the New Scientist magazine a long time ago. It said that 80% of our mental activity is generated by our mental activity. Only 20% is coming through our five senses. So mostly what we're experiencing as pleasant or unpleasant is due to what's going on in our minds as we process the sensory input. And what the Buddha is pointing out when he says the end of dukkha is you can learn to process your sensory input in a way so you don't generate mental dukkha Vedana. There's a sutta, it's number Samyutta 36.6. It's called the dart or the arrow. And this is the sutta about the two arrows. An unenlightened person gets hit with one arrow and it's painful, and then they get all upset, and that's the second dart. An enlightened person gets hit with the same sensory input, but does not get upset and does not hit themselves with the second dart. So when the Buddha says he teaches the end of dukkha, he's teaching the end of dukkha reactions to your sensory input. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. So just so in what you just said, so really the end of dukkha is the end of the dukkha reaction, but it doesn't mean that the bummer is going to end.
So the Buddha had a bad back. Sometimes he would turn to Sariputta or Moggallana and say, please, he'd give the introduction to a Dhamma talk and he'd say, please elaborate. And he said, I need to lie down and rest my back. He didn't say my back is hurting me. He just knew that he needed to lie down and rest his back. And he would listen to the talk, and when it was over, he'd come out and say, yeah, if I'd given the talk, I'd have said exactly the same thing. But his back was bad enough, producing enough unpleasant touch sensations, he needed to rest it. And when he was dying, it was rather unpleasant. Okay, you don't get, if you step on one of your kids' Legos and you're fully awakened, it's still going to hurt. Okay, but you're not going to go scream at your kid for leaving the Legos out because you're not going to have the dukkha mental reaction.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leigh. So I think now we have, we're going to transition to questions, additional questions that have been pre-submitted, but I see that there are some chats that were sent to me with questions. I won't be able to read the chat, so if you can please send the questions to the chat where it says ask questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to read a couple of questions that were pre-submitted. So can you, somebody asked about, I guess this is connected to the Visuddhimagga also, the role of nimittas and kasinas in jhana practice, and why can kasina practice be dangerous?
So the word nimitta in the suttas means sign. If your stomach is growling, it's a sign you're hungry. It has no other meaning other than that. But yeah, a sign of good concentration is if you're following your breathing gets very shallow. Okay, it's just a sign of good concentration. The word nimitta appears in the suttas only in that context. The word kasina appears in a list of kasinas. That's it. Just list 10 kasinas. Nothing about what to do with them or anything. There are a number of lists in the suttas, as you may know, and in one set of lists, the 10 kasinas are listed, and that's it. No explanation. That's all. By the time of the Visuddhimagga, so we're saying 800-900 years later, the understanding of the jhanas had changed so much that you needed to get a visual, specific sign of concentration. So nimitta, with a capital N maybe, meant like a circle of bright light shining in your face. That would be a visual nimitta. And you need to absorb into that to get to the first jhana. One way to generate that circle is with a kasina. And a kasina would be a physical disc of a solid color. Don't remember what the colors are: red, blue, white, black, something like that. Or staring at a candle, that's the fire kasina. Or staring at a hole in the wall that, you can just see the sky behind it. That would be the air kasina. So there's kasinas for the 4 elements. There's 2 more, I don't remember. For the colored disc, okay, if you stare at a red disc long enough, when you close your eyes, you're going to see a green disc. You're going to see the after image with the opposite color. If you're concentrated enough, you can keep that after image sustaining until you get the real stable nimitta that's required for the jhanas in the Visuddhimagga. So that's how they're used. This is not discussed at all in the suttas, but it's discussed in great detail in the Visuddhimagga. Why do some teachers say they're dangerous? I don't know, unless the teacher thinks the jhanas are dangerous. Most teachers who think the jhanas are dangerous think that you're going to waste your entire practice life pursuing these very difficult states and never do your insight practice. Or you're going to get addicted to the jhanas. If you're doing what's in the suttas, you might, when you first learn them, get pretty entranced by it. When I'm teaching a retreat, I need to keep an eye out for people that are showing signs of jhana addiction and push them into doing their insight practice. Well, the insights they get are so much more interesting than the jhanas. Problem solved. So, but for the Visuddhimagga jhanas, it's going to take such amount of effort that you're going to spend a lot of time just working on your concentration, and maybe not do any insight practice and not make any progress on the spiritual path. So I suspect that's why they're saying it's dangerous. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is, forget about the Visuddhimagga jhanas. The Buddha wasn't doing that. Do what the Buddha was doing. Much easier to learn. And it was good enough for the Buddha. It's good enough for me.
Yeah, thank you. So again, I want to remind you, please put your questions on the chat where it says ask questions here. Don't send them to me, please. Okay, and then I have one more question. Let me see if I can. Okay, so somebody's saying, as I listen to your discussion of the 8 jhanas, I wonder if each is a particular destination with unique qualities, or if the 8 are mileposts on a continuous path towards deeper concentration and non-distractedness.
I think the answer is yes. Okay, so they are specific mental states. They're not like steps. One sort of slides into the other. I think of them as plateaus, and you slide down to the stable spot that's a plateau, and you slide down to the next stable spot that's a plateau. We do know from basically looking at my brain on jhanas with EEG and fMRI, they are distinct states. You can see that it looks different from the previous jhana, and the next jhana looks different from the one that came before. So they're distinct states. But so I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I drive up to the toll taker on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I tell him I can do all 8 jhanas, and he lets me across for just $6. But he lets everybody across for $6. 8 jhanas and $1 will get you a cup of coffee. Well, no, coffee costs more than that. But yeah, they're cool, they're fun, they're nice, but they're not going to advance your spiritual practice that much unless you use them as a preliminary to your insight practice. So I wouldn't say that they're mileposts along the way. The mileposts along the way for your spiritual progress are going to be the depth of your insights. But to get on the freeway, it's really nice to have an on-ramp, and the jhanas are a really good on-ramp for freeway style insight practice. It goes a lot faster. I mean, that's what they're the setup for. You can still drive the back streets without the jhanas. You're just not going to get there as fast.
Okay, thank you, Leigh. So this is a pre-submitted question. Can you share your own direct experience of your most precarious moments of either going mad or having actually gone mad? I.e., when the ego has claimed ownership for a sustained period of moments from your apparent deepest insights into the 3 characteristics, and how you journey back to upekkha, to equanimity.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I would not say that I ever went mad during any insight. I did have a very deep insight into not self. The insight itself was, whoa. I mean, I was blown away. But about 30 seconds later, I realized I was going to die. Not right then, but, and I had heard rumors that I was going to die before, but it hit home much more profoundly than it ever had in the previous 50 years of my life. I mean, it was frightening. I was terrified for about 30 seconds, and then it passed. I just stayed there with it until it passed. And when it passed, it was just like, oh, yeah, of course. What'd you think? And then it was back to just basically contemplating what I had seen with the experience of not self. And this happened at home, and I just continued to contemplate that for the rest of the evening until I went to bed. So there was fear there that arose. I can't say I had ever had madness arise, but I would suspect that madness arises due to fear. And very definitely on the spiritual path, you may get an insight that you find quite disturbing. I mean, if you're working with anicca, the impermanent, inconstant nature of reality, and you get deep insight into the fact that the thing you're most counting on to provide some security and stability in your life is subject to anicca, that can freak you out, right? The only thing you can really do when you hit, well, it's called the knowledge of terror in the progress of insight. When you hit the knowledge of terror, the thing to do is keep practicing. If you turn around and run the other way, it's going to follow you like your shadow. You've got to integrate the insight that you've gotten. And the only way to integrate that insight is to keep practicing. Keep looking at the terrifying thing, right? You've got to look at it in terms of what you've learned so far with the Dhamma so that you can integrate it. Not indulging in it, not freaking out about it. All right, so the thing you saw, the thing that you thought was going to give you everlasting security, you see now as impermanent. All right. Well, okay, the Buddha said everything is impermanent. Why does this surprise you that your security blanket is impermanent? What else are you looking for to give you security? Yeah, all of that's impermanent too. Impermanence is the nature of reality. How can I come to terms with impermanence? Not how can I run away and get a security blanket back? That's not going to work because it's still going to be impermanent and it's going to be gnawing in your background that it's impermanent. So how can I take this insight and generalize it to a way that gives me a deeper understanding of the nature of reality? And I would say that's probably the thing to do with the madness, right? You went mad. All right. How can you integrate the insight that made you go mad? I think that's the best way to do it. And the way to integrate it is keep practicing, keep looking at the generalized case, because the three characteristics are generalized insights.
Mhm. Thank you, Leigh. So another question that was submitted was somebody asked, because when we talk about Vedana and sensory input, because there is also a definition of unworldly Vedana. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about Vedana with flesh and Vedana without flesh. That's literally what it says. And so there are a number of interpretations. One interpretation is there are worldly Vedana and spiritual Vedana. So the unworldly would be a translation of the understanding of spiritual. And so a worldly Vedana, oh, ice cream, that's pleasant Vedana. A spiritual pleasant Vedana would be generosity, metta, gratitude. Those would be pleasant Vedana generated in a spiritual context. And unpleasant worldly Vedana would be stubbing your toe. An unpleasant spiritual Vedana would be, oh, that insight that made you go mad or got you upset, right? Or the fact that, yeah, okay, another meditation period coming up. I really want to go watch that TV program, but, I know it's going to be better for me to go meditate. All right. So you're having a little bit of mental unpleasant Vedana about your spiritual practice, but mostly the really rock your boat unpleasant spiritual Vedana are the insights that, upset the fact that you were looking for something that's permanent, something that's going to be eternally happy, and you as the king of the universe, and you don't find that. Neutral Vedana, well, the pressure in your left foot right now is probably pretty neutral Vedana. That's worldly Vedana. Neutral spiritual Vedana would be equanimity. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in those contexts, we can get pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, both worldly and spiritual. Mm-hmm. Another way of looking at it is that the with flesh is the 5 sense Vedana, and the without flesh is your mental Vedana as you process the 5 sense. And I find that much more helpful to realize that we have some control over how we're processing it. If there's a loud sound, it's going to be an unpleasant Vedana. Fingernails down the blackboard are going to produce unpleasant Vedana. Okay, but how do you process it? That's where you have the possibility of change, so that you don't process it as unpleasant. And so that's another way of looking at with flesh and without flesh.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So here, there's another question that was submitted in the chat. Could you please comment on translating high levels of concentration and a clear insight into anatta on the cushion to wholesome life of the cushion? As a lay practitioner with a family, it seems difficult to remain mindful and not fall back into selfing and the various forms of discomfort, dukkha that selfing allows. Actually, there's something that I wanted to follow up, like the relationship between dukkha and selfing also.
Yeah. Okay, that's the easy part. Okay, so dukkha arises dependent on craving and clinging, right? You must have a craver, because craving is I want to get. So you got to have the sense of self to get it. Somebody's got to get it. Me. And the same with the clinging. I got it. I'm going to hang on to it. I I'm going to hang on to it. I'm going to be the owner. So a sense of self is necessary for craving and clinging. The Buddhist strategy is to uproot the sense of self. With no sense of self, there's nobody who's craving and nobody who's clinging. No craving, no clinging, no dukkha. Okay? But yeah, taking the sense of not self back into daily life is a challenge because, one, we live in a culture that completely encourages selfishness. All right? I took a trip around the world, and in Asia, the basic unit of society is the family, not the self. And after I left Asia, I came to Europe, and the selves are coming back into prominence here. And then I come back to the US, and the self is just all over the place. So what would happen if you overcome the sense of self is you have no basis for selfishness, right? So the way you take the understanding, the experience of not self back into life is you're less selfish. This does not mean that you still don't have boundaries. It's absolutely essential that you have personal boundaries. If you don't, it's just not going to work well. Okay, so you've got to have boundaries, but they have to be porous enough to let in your family, your close friends, and so forth. You're not isolating yourself. I mean, that would be becoming really selfish, right? But you don't tear down all your boundaries and let everybody do whatever they want with you, because that's not a healthy way to survive either. So coming back into the unreal world, as I call it, after a deep understanding of not self, basically means that you have healthy boundaries. You know what's necessary so you can take care of this mind-body process, but you're not isolating yourself into a selfish condition either. And it's a challenge, especially if you have a family, because everybody in the family is pulling on you, but you have to make sure you take time for yourself.
Okay.
It's not that not self doesn't mean you can give yourself fully to everyone. The Buddha would still go on retreat. He would say, look, I'm going on retreat for a month. You guys take care of yourself, because he felt he needed to get away and do that. That was him setting his boundaries. Think about it. He's got 1,000 followers. The monks and nuns misbehave occasionally. He's got to create another precept. It was stressful, right? And he had to go take care of himself. There was the argument at Kosambi. It basically was somebody left the toilet seat up. I mean, that wasn't what it was about. It was about the water for, cleaning up. But, it was this huge thing that came about leaving the toilet seat up, right? And the Buddha goes and tries to resolve it, and the monks won't listen or anything. And he says, hey, I'm leaving. And he just disappears. They wake up one morning and he's gone. He's like, they're going to have to figure this out for themselves, right? And they did. Because the lay people said, these monks are always quarreling. Let's don't give them any alms rounds till they get this resolved. And so they go on alms round and come back with no food. And it was like, oh yeah, we got to resolve this thing so we can eat. And the Buddha was wise. It was like he couldn't convince these people. There was nothing he could say. There was nothing that could be said. So he just left, took care of himself, went on retreat for a month. And he came back, everything had been solved. So take care of yourself. Take care of your illusory self. It is a genuine illusion, and until you're fully awakened, it's going to keep creeping back in. Take care of it.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. So also somebody is asking about like when you are mature in your practice and like you've experienced the first jhana or the second jhana, is it possible that sometimes you sit and you go straight to the third jhana?
Yeah. You can start your car in third gear it's kind of tricky. But if you're on a downhill slope, it's pretty easy, actually, right? The downhill slope for starting your jhana practice in third jhana is good concentration. When I'm on a retreat, when it's into the retreat and I've gotten really settled and I've been in the jhanas already that day, I can come back in from a walking meditation period and sit down and just go straight into the third jhana. I know where it is and I have sufficient concentration that I can do that. When they were testing me in the fMRI, you can't move your head. They do a baseline thing and you can't move your head after that. Well, if I go into the first jhana, there's enough energy, it might cause me to move my head. There's a lot of vibration going on. So I would just go straight into second jhana. I would have to get enough concentration so that I could go into second jhana. So if you're sufficiently concentrated, you can go into any of the jhanas. I've had people stumbling into all 8 of the jhanas on some other retreat. And I've had people stumble into the first 7 jhanas on, some retreat someplace, and then come to me and describe, they come in, can I tell you about something that happened to me? And they describe falling into, 4th jhana or 7th jhana or something like that. And sometimes what they describe, I don't know what's happened, but it's fairly often, most common, they describe one of these jhanas. These are states the mind likes to go into. And so if you have sufficient concentration and your mind gets oriented in the direction of the qualities of that jhana, that's where you'll go. If you're really concentrated and feel so content, you'll just wind up in the third jhana. Mm-hmm. The fact that a hippie computer programmer from Mississippi can teach this stuff, it's not about me as a teacher. It's about the fact that I'm teaching it to human beings who have minds that are somewhat similar to mine and Ayya Khema's and the Buddha's. And it's just a matter of a few tricks of, get yourself concentrated by following your breath like this for a while, and then find some pleasure to focus on, and the jhana will come and find you.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. We only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to, somebody's asking, I think you already touched on this, but maybe like your personal definition of insight practice, and like if you meditate, can that lead into spontaneous insight? And also then somebody asked, what would be a good book to learn about insight practice?
Yeah. So Ayya Khema defined an insight as an understood experience. Okay, so if you've never had a mango and somebody describes it to you, do you know what a mango tastes like? No, you've got to have the experience. Or if you've never had a mango and somebody gives you something and says, do you like the taste of this? And you love it, but they don't tell you it's a mango. You don't know what a mango tastes like until you've had the understood experience. An insight practice is a practice that tends to give you experiences and understanding into either personal stuff that's going on, your personal insights, or into anicca, dukkha, or anatta. Okay, so there are lots of different insight practices. The Satipatthana Sutta is probably the best source of insight practices that the Buddha taught. And so there are several good books on the Satipatthana Sutta. There's a scholarly book by Bhikkhu Analayo, Satipatthana, the Direct Path to Enlightenment. And that's a scholarly look at it and gives you some idea of how to do the practices. And Joseph Goldstein has a very big, thick book where he goes through the whole of the Satipatthana Sutta in great detail. It's a brilliant book. It's based on Dharma talks he gave at the Forest Refuge over actually a several-year period. And he discusses insight practices in there. Ayya Khema has a book. The original title was When the Iron Eagle Flies, and I think it's now called Know Where You're Going. And she talks about insight
Yes.
practices in that book.
Yeah.
So those are 3 books I can recommend.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm posting here, Leigh's, on the chat, Leigh's website, where you can get more information on retreats he'll be teaching, or also his books and the new book, Dependent Origination and Emptiness.
Yeah, and I would have a request. If you like Dependent Origination and Emptiness, if you like it after you've read it, and you have a website or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, post a link to the book. I need some help with my search engine optimization. I don't have... I don't have a team. I self-published the book so I could give it away for free. And so I need some help with, more links being out there, because the more links there are to it, the faster it shows up in a search engine. So if you've got links, someplace you can put links to the book, that would be definitely appreciated.
Thank you. And a link to the book have been just posted here also. So everyone, we really appreciate your presence here today, and especially Leigh, thank you so much for your offering, for your time here. And we appreciate your generosity for everyone in supporting IMCW's Second Sunday Dharma Series fundraiser. And the recording of this event will be emailed to all registered within a week. And I think that's it for now. Thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful day.
I just want to say thank you all for being here. They say that teaching the Dhamma is a way to make good karma. So may any merit from today's sharing of the Dhamma be for the benefit and liberation of all beings everywhere.
Thank you, Leigh.